On Wednesday, January 4, 1843, Reverend Henry Townsend entered Abeokuta from Badagry and thus brought Christianity to the Egba people of the city. A party was sent to receive him, and it was a great reception. Many of the citizens left their markets and homes to catch a glimpse of the white man as they greeted him in the English language. Before the coming of Christianity to Abeokuta in the mid-19th century, the Egba people were peaceful forest dwellers of the Yoruba country in present-day Ibadan, of whom nothing was known until their 18th century rebellion against the Alaafin, the central authority of the Oyo Empire. But how did the Egbas leave their forest in Ibadan for Abeokuta, and what caused their fight against the Alaafin of the Oyo Empire? Abi was the one who led the liberation of the Egba people from Oyo. This liberation took place around the year 1780 when Abiodun was Alaafin. Abi was a resident of Igbeyin who had been born in Itoku. It was him who freed the Egba people by organizing concurrent killings of the Ajele or Ilaris in all the towns of Egba, which began in Igbeyin. More than 600 of these Ilaris were wiped out in a single day. Ilaris were the agents of the Alaafin and the collectors of the tributes paid to the treasury of the Alaafin from all territories under the Oyo Empire. These Ilaris behaved like an army of occupation in the places they had run. Their oppressive rules marked them as an instrument of oppression and suppression of the people. It was the reckless lives of these Ilaris in Egbaland that threw up Abi and his colleagues, who vowed to put an end to the evil law at all costs when they destroyed the Ilaris in their midst. When the news reached metropolitan Oyo, the capital of the Oyo Empire, the Balogun didn't waste any time sending the army to crush the rebellion. The Egba, however, expected revenge and integrated it into their strategy. The revenge army was defeated and the liberation of the Egbas from the yoke of the Alaafin was secured. Around 49 years later in 1829, Lamodi of Igbeyin, who was also the Balogun of the Egba, living in Maye's camp in Ibadan, determined that the Egba should find a way to escape Maye's abuse. Previously, the Egbas had learnt of Abeokuta in their search for a safe place to settle in. They then sent Shobokun, the chief of Ilugun, and others to bring a handful of soil, and the outcome was fruitful. It should be noted that the Egba people did not arrive at Abeokuta at the same time in 1830. The first batch to arrive at Abeokuta consisted of Egba Alake, Okiono, and Gbagura in that order. Consequently, Olufakun took the Owu people to Abeokuta. In an epic battle, Lamodi lost his wife while trying to save his first son, Oshota, from being captured by Maye's army, who were pursuing them. However, before he died, he relinquished leadership to Shodeke, the Seriki of the Egba. It was Shodeke who commandeered the Egba Alake into Abeokuta. Balogun Olunloye led Egba Okiono, while Oluwole Agbo brought the Gbagura to Abeokuta. It was discovered that the leader of Iloko, called Idowu Likperu, had lived in the settlement earlier. He had crossed the river Ogun and eventually settled on farmland where three hunters, Jibulu, Ose, and Olunle, joined him. Unlike Likperu, who built a house with the aid of the then Olubara Lafa, the three hunters stayed in caves under the Olumo rock. They were the ones who told the delegates of the Egba who had come to take earth samples from the rock about Olumo. A farmer named Adagba and others moved to Olumo to join Likperu and three hunters who had settled there. Adagba was a courageous man who had his farmland very close to Olumo. The settlement was renamed Oko Adagba, that is Adagba Farm, another name for Abeokuta. Olumo means created by the Lord. However, scholars have argued that the meaning of Olumo is Oluwafimo, meaning God has put an end to wars against their enemies and their sufferings. Abeokuta is also known as Abeolumo. Literally, Abeokuta means under the stone. Between 1830 and the turn of the century, the settlers in Abeokuta were forced to fight several wars for the survival of an expanding settlement. In 1832, the Ijeburemo people incited the new settlers to take up arms against several Ijeburemo towns in the Owiwi War. In 1834, the attempted invasion of Ibadan also challenged them in a war that resulted in the heavy defeat of the Ibadan army at the Battle of Arakonga, which demonstrated the power and indispensability of the warriors of the Owu settlers who had only recently been persuaded by Sodeke to settle with them in order to boost the defenses of Abeokuta. Years after Shodeke's death, they would also fight some wars with Dahomey, where they roundly defeated King Gezo's army. In 1839, just 9 years after the founding of Abeokuta, the Egbas, who had been freed from the slave trade and settled in Sierra Leone, where they had been taught by the Europeans and had become Christians, began to move to Badagry and then to Abeokuta when they learnt that their people had left the Egba forests. On December 19, 1842, Reverend Henry Townsend arrived in Badagry. He was sent by the Christian Missionary Society CMS in England to gather more information about the Yoruba nation and in particular the people of Egba who wished the missionaries to be present in Abeokuta. Once Townsend arrived in Badagry, he learnt that he had been preceded by some messengers of peace. The Methodists, headed by Reverend Thomas Birch Freeman, had set up a mission in Badagry. In fact, on December 11, 1842, Freeman had visited Abeokuta at Shodeke's invitation and had just returned to Badagry, where Townsend arrived, and the accounts Freeman had given of his reception in Abeokuta encouraged Townsend. Reverend Henry Townsend reached Abeokuta on Wednesday, January 4, 1843. A horsemen's party was sent to receive him, and it was a great reception. Many of the Egba citizens left their markets and homes to catch a glimpse of the white man as they greeted him in the English language. "How do you do, white man? How do you do, you that you are coming?" Since Ifa had already predicted the coming of Townsend, Sodeke welcomed him warmly and made the clergyman sit on his lap, a sign of sincere acceptance and hospitality. Shodeke's 4 wives were present as well. Certain chiefs who welcomed the visitor were Okukenu, who later became the first Alake, Ogundikpe, Oshundare, Ogundeji, and Ogunbono. Because Ake was paramount to the Egbas, it was agreed that the august visitors would be quartered there and that they would be given 3 acres of land to build on. The first church service took place in Abeokuta on Sunday, January 5, 1843, and Townsend preached the sermon from the Bible book of Luke, chapter 14, verse 12 to 24. The service was conducted in Chief Shodeke's residence, and Andrew Diselu Willem, a former Egba slave who had already been a catechist and had followed Townsend from Badagry, acted as an interpreter. 1 week later, on Tuesday, January 10, 1843, Reverend Henry Townsend had to return to England via Sierra Leone for his ordination, and Sodeke gave him gifts that included an elephant's tusk, a large white goat, and 20 cowries in a covered calabash. While he was gone, Desalu was managing the work in Abeokuta, and Christianity in the town developed tremendously. A section of the land given to Townsend by Sodeke was used to erect a building simply referred to as Ake Church in 1844. It is now St. Peter's Anglican Church, Ake, Abeokuta. The walls and seats were made of clay, while palm fronds were used to cover it. With Desalu's zealous preaching leading to great converts, the traditional worshippers became furious and burnt down in 1846 what was, in fact, the first church in Nigeria. Instead of dampening their excitement, the converts were ferociously encouraged to further expand their area both numerically and physically. With the aid of Exeter in England, The burnt church was restored and dedicated on March 21, 1847 at a cost of £30. The Ake Church was the first building in Abeokuta to be built with corrugated iron roofing sheets. Aggressive evangelism still persisted, and even when the building had yet to be completed, Townsend held services in front of the house in Ake. Later, membership increased to about 200 participants. By 1852, the number of worshippers had grown so much that they needed to expand the church at a cost of £200. On March 17, 1859, Bishop Brown, who had come from Sierra Leone, dedicated the expanded church. At that ceremony, a priest was ordained and 180 members were confirmed by the bishop. Years later, in 1911, Reverend Josiah J.C. Ransom Kuti, the father of Israel Oludotun Ransom Kuti and grandfather of Fela Kuti, was appointed a clergyman of the Ake Church after he had previously served as the superintendent of the Abeokuta Church Mission. Now, let us look at the impact of Christianity in Abeokuta. In August 1846, when Townsend returned for the mission work in Abeokuta, he was joined by a native and one of the Sierra Leonean freed slaves, Reverend later Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther. The efforts of the missionaries affected people in diverse ways. Apart from the social rejuvenation that occurred, people began to profit from ginnery and cotton exports, which began in 1849. Human sacrifice and slavery were also restricted. In fact, during the American Civil War from 1861 through 1865, which interrupted the U.S. cotton trade to Europe, Abeokuta exported cotton to England. The first newspaper in Nigeria, Iwe Iroyin, was published in Abeokuta in 1859, and the Bible was first translated into the Yoruba language in the year 1862. In order to establish the value of legal trade, the missionaries encouraged the entry of European merchants to Abeokuta. The nobles of the town started to develop good etiquette through the observations of these foreigners. Many neighboring cities who had heard of the success and prosperity of Abeokuta also welcomed missionaries into their midst, which eventually led to the establishment of Christian stations at Oyo, Ibadan, Iseyin, Ile-Ife, Ilesha, and other Yoruba towns.